Hello, 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 and welcome to a very special edition, a Mother's Day edition of Child Please Podcast. We are super excited today. I'm Regina Weathersby, one of the hosts,
I'm Erica Simpson.
and we have a very special guest with us here today. So, we brought in this guest today because we believe that you are a mother of mothers. We believe that you are someone who has been a trailblazer. You have taken something that was an experience that you had and really created something that so many people will be able to benefit from. And we know that took so much strength and perseverance, just a lot. And so we appreciate the sacrifice that you made and just all of the work and advocacy you did, not just for yourself, but for so many mothers in the state of Alabama. So, what we're talking about today is the Genesis Act. The Genesis Act, and we have with us the person who birthed the Genesis Act, literally, Miss Keondra Hampton. So, yay! We are so excited to have you, and we want to hear all about it. So, just tell us about your story.
Wow. Um, Let me get myself together. I'm already a little full today. And so hearing you talk made me a little bit more fuller. However, where do we start? Genesis. Genesis Act was actually birthed, like she said, from my daughter, Genesis. I lost Genesis when I was 17 weeks pregnant. And seeing her, um, she was just a regular baby to me. And so she did pass. And so when I was leaving the hospital, I asked about a birth certificate for her because she was a baby that I had just birthed. And I wanted something tangible to be able to remember her by because I never wanted to forget her. And so when I asked the nurse or social worker about a birth certificate, she was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am, you can't get one in the state of Alabama. You have to be 20 weeks in order to be recorded." And when she said that, it was just like sticking a knife
Yes.
in my already broken heart because it was like, well, what do you mean she won't be recorded, counted? So it's like she's never existed. Um, and it was just like, it just really blew my mind because I had never been in a situation before. It was something I had never thought about. And so when I asked, it was because the nurses kept telling me, "Oh, we have some more paperwork for you to sign." I opted to have her cremated because at the time we were just started planning. I had already had a gender reveal, and we were planning a baby shower, and I just couldn't fathom planning a funeral the same week I was planning a baby shower. And so when the option was presented about cremation, I just said that was what I wanted to do because I couldn't think about anything else. And so I was thinking when they were saying paperwork, like I had already signed paperwork for that, then the next paperwork I thought was going to be the birth certificate paperwork. So I was completely caught off guard when I found out that it wasn't. And what really struck me is that I was aware that Alabama had been during that time, because this was in 2021, really pushing the abortion law and about how life begins at a heartbeat. And so not only did Genesis make it past the heartbeat stage, she was, growing, gender reveals, and I'm looking at her, and she has eyes, and she has ears, and she has ribs and feet, and just everything. And so I'm like, how can you say life begins at a heartbeat, but you're not even willing to count my baby that's right here? Um, and I also was aware of the fetal homicide law and the fact that if you kill a pregnant woman in the state of Alabama, they're going to charge you with murder of 2 lives. No matter how far along you are, they're going to still consider that life, and that person will be charged, like I said, with murder of 2 lives. So I'm just still confused because I don't understand how you going to, at this point, we were looking at arresting doctors who, performed abortions for murder because they're taking a life. If someone took the life of someone's pregnant and their baby, they're going to go to jail for 2 lives. But I didn't just had my precious baby Genesis, and her life doesn't matter. And it just was just crazy because I'm like, the only way she would have mattered in the state of Alabama at the current time is if I had aborted her or someone had killed me. Is really how I saw it, because those were the only two laws at the time that would have made her be counted as a person.
Wow.
So let's go. I want you to go back and tell me about your experience in the hospital, like before you got to the point of asking for a birth certificate, like the series of events that even led up to it.
So actually, I had Genesis at home. I was at home, and I was actually had been to work that day, had went Christmas shopping because it was 3 days before Christmas, December 22nd. And so preparing for Christmas, and I went home and I just laid down. I was really tired. I was already kind of feeling a little funny because I guess she had already dropped. And I had told a coworker earlier that day, I was like, oh, I think I'm going to be doing that little pregnant wobbly walk a little early. Like I already find myself. And so I guess things were kind of changing then, and I didn't know it. And so I laid down and I went to sleep. And then I woke up in the middle of the night. I was like, oh, I think I got to go to the bathroom. And so in the process of me going to the bathroom, thinking I needed to go to the bathroom, I ended up not needing to. And when I was getting up, that's when I realized that I had actually started having her. And so I actually ended up, I felt something protruding from me, and it turned out that it was her feet. Um, and so I ended up having to call my mom, call the ambulance, and it was just very traumatic because the ambulance had never, the EMT, they had never experienced anything like that, because at this point, we were still connected because she had an umbilical cord, and they never had to cut an umbilical cord before. They were calling their chiefs, and it was just a lot. And so we ended up, I opted not to go in the ambulance to the hospital because I felt like at this point there was no emergency, because she was already gone. Um, and so just going to the hospital, it was very, very, very traumatic, because I opted. I had her in a box, and just when I handed her to the nurses, I knew, it just made it seem so real, because I think I had been in a state of shock up until then, and just because I had her at home, I never her placenta didn't pass, and so I lost a lot of blood. I was given shots. I had to go into emergency surgery. I also was running a fever, a really bad fever, that the doctors and the nurses, they were basically refusing. I couldn't, even though this happened at maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, it was 5 o'clock the next day. I still couldn't have any water or anything to eat because they, felt that I was going to have to go into surgery, and you can't have anything on your stomach. And so my fever was creeping up really high, and they was like, oh, well, we can't give you anything unless you get to, 103. And I'm like, 103? I'm already at 101. I was like, I have a fever. And I basically ended up having to look at the nurse and just ask her, do you want me to die? Because I felt like, why you can't just give me a little water to give me something to get this fever down? Because at this point, I'm bleeding really bad. I have a fever and I'm just not, in a good space. And it was just like, until I said that, after I said that, she looked at me and she was like, let me go get the doctor. Um, and so the doctor ended up telling her that she needed to go ahead and give me something to get the fever down. And so they brought me a little sip of water, so that I could take some pills to break the fever. And it just really resonated with me that until I asked her, did she want me to die? I would have continued to let my fever, they would have continued to let my fever get to 103 before they would have been willing to give me anything to break the fever.
And then it's the fact that when she went to the doctor, there was a solution, meaning that if you were able to give me something then, you could have given me something before.
Yes.
But it took an extreme of you having to look at somebody and say, do you want me to die? In the hospital. Before anybody felt like it was important to take an action. That's ridiculous.
And it just, and all I really thought about was that, what if I didn't say that? What if I just listened to them? What if I didn't speak up for myself? Where would my family be? Would they have lost 2 people on that day? I'm just thankful that I had the mind to speak up.
Yeah.
But because, like I said, if it was left up to them, I had already lost a lot of blood. And like I said, that's the other part that people don't always realize with miscarriages, is because I still went through the whole process. And I always call it, even though you don't have a baby that people can see, it doesn't change what that whole experience. It was the whole experience was the same.
So what about the law? When you decided, okay, you know what, I had this experience, but I'm gonna take what I experienced and turn this around, and nobody else is gonna have to deal with what I had to deal with. Tell us about just that process and,
So I felt like I don't know what was going on, but I felt like it was just one thing after another. Because after I lost Genesis, I found myself back in the hospital the same week. And at that point, it was because I had COVID. And I didn't know that I had COVID, but I had another fever after I had stopped taking the ibuprofen. And at the hospital, they did all types of tests, and the COVID test was last. And it turned out that I had COVID. And so that was a very traumatic experience for me, because it was 2021. COVID was still, it wasn't what it is now. And at that point in time, my mom, I haven't went back to my house yet. I was still staying with my mom, and she hadn't had COVID, and she wasn't trying to get COVID. And so I was locked in the room.
Yeah.
And so she would set food outside the door and knock and spray. And so I had a lot of time by myself, which was hard. It was very hard, because when you lose somebody, that's when you really need to be embraced and be around people. But during that time, I was isolated. And so something just told me to start doing research about the law. It never, like I said, it was like a knife when the lady told me that, because I wasn't 20 weeks, that she wouldn't be counting. And so I started doing research. I researched whether or not the Alabama laws that were on the books to be able to show the inconsistencies in the law. And I also researched other states of whether or not they counted babies that were born prior to 20 weeks and what they did for babies that were born. And so I saw that Tennessee, I think California, is about 5 or 6 other states where they actually were providing something called non-viable birth certificates for babies that were born prior to 20 weeks to acknowledge, their lives and allow the families to have something tangible to remember their babies by. And so I basically gathered, at that point, it was just gathering information because I didn't know what would happen next or, how it would happen. And so after that, I just saved all the information and it always just stayed on my heart. I actually live in unincorporated Jefferson County, so we don't have a mayor and, all of those things. But I started just getting notifications about the Jefferson County Commission hosting these forums in my community that I've never received before. If I received them, I never paid it any attention. And so I was like, I need to go to this. And so I went there, and while I was there, Wandalyn Gavan, I had never met her before. Prior to then, when she stood up to introduce herself, she said she was responsible for bills. And I was like, hmm. And so during the meeting, I was able to make eye contact with her, and I kind of mouthed to her, like, I need to talk to you. And so she just kind of nodded back and was like, okay. And so I found her after the meeting was over, and she looked at me and she was like, you got something to say. And I was like, I do. And she was like, I'm going to give you my cell phone number and I'm going to let you be my nighttime conversation. And you can tell me what you got going on. And I was like, wow. I never expected her to give me her cell phone number. And, I didn't have any expectations. This was the first meeting that I had ever even went to like that. And I called her that night and we actually talked. And I told her everything that had happened and what I wanted to do. And she said, I think you're on to something. She said, I see what you're talking about, and I think this can work. She said, send me everything you have. And, you know, when God does a thing, He really does it because, to be honest, I did no additional research than what I did when I had COVID. That was the only research. And it was just like God intentionally set me down. And it was that same research is what I sent her that night that was used to generate the bill. And so she let me know that she was going to introduce it during the next legislature session. Um, she connected me basically the process with the attorneys that was writing it, the first bill. It really wasn't what I wanted it to say. And so I was able to call the attorneys at the state house, speak with them. I sent them examples of birth certificates that the other states had so that they can know what I was looking for. Because at this point, this is something new that's never been done before in the state of Alabama. And so I had to kind of provide examples and of how I wanted the law to read. And it was a very unique process because I've never been involved in anything like that before. I'm just a social worker. I never saw myself being in that type of process of changing a law.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so when was it signed?
It was signed in May of 2023. Governor Kay Ivey, she signed it into law, and it's so special because it actually passed the House and the Senate unanimously. And I actually met a guy while I was in Montgomery one day during the session, and he was just like, I just got to shake your hand. He said, I come to Montgomery all the time. And he said, I have never seen the House and the Senate and just the Republicans and Democrats agree on anything the way that they supported you on today. And he actually was hosted a radio show, and he invited me on his show that same day to talk about the Genesis Law as well. But one thing that I can say about it that being in Montgomery was really special is that so many people, senators and representatives that were mostly men, spoke on my behalf because miscarriages and loss is something that, regardless of what your political affiliation is, regardless of what your race is, it can affect anybody. And those members of the House and Senate, they were had basically had people in their family who had experienced loss, and they agreed that having something tangible would have been helpful in the healing process for their loved ones. And so it was something that, when you're going through something and you're thinking that you're alone, because people don't always speak on things like that. But just to see them, get up and they basically share stories about loss in their families. And it just can affect anybody. And so they were very overwhelmingly supportive of knowing that inconsistency in the law of not counting babies until 20 weeks, when you say that life begins at a heartbeat, that was a law that needed to be changed in Alabama.
Yeah. Girl, that is absolutely amazing. Every time I've heard this, but every time you talk about it, I'm just like, do you understand what you did? You know what I mean? So I remember this is some years ago. I saw a quote, and so I'm gonna say it to you. That really resonated with me after child loss, and it said, "Heaven and earth may separate us, but nothing will ever change the fact that you made me a mom." And so that's how I feel about you with Genesis. You have created something, and her name will never be forgotten. People will always say her name. And so we decided that we wanted to honor you on this Mother's Day edition because we appreciate you, we love you, we thank you for your sacrifice, and we believe in giving people their flowers. And so we wanted to bring you some flowers for Mother's Day.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it so much.
And say thank you for all that you've done. Girl, if I fall on this floor. So we want to say thank you, and we really appreciate you. And we also appreciate you all for tuning in again. Happy Mother's Day.
That's nice to say.
Okay. She was like, hold up. That's all right. Go ahead.
I want to just conclude in saying how the Genesis Act is continuing to make an impact in the state of Alabama. During this legislative session, the Parental Leave Act was passed.
Yes.
And it has now been signed into law by Governor Kay Ivey. And what's significant about this new Parental Leave Act for teachers and state employees that I'm hoping, can be included for more people, is that it now includes miscarriages after 12 weeks and after, as well as stillborns. And these are families that I can say that I know would not have been included in the Parental Leave Act if it was not for the Genesis Act. because they would not have been able to be included because babies prior to the Genesis Act that was lost via miscarriage prior to 20 weeks were not even being recorded. So it would not have even been a way for them to um, be included, for those parents to be included in the in the Parental Leave Act. And so not only is the Genesis Act allowing parents to get birth certificates to have something tangible to acknowledge and remember their babies by, but now parents of who have miscarriages, they're able to still get the same time off work.
Yes.
Because even though it wasn't the Parental Leave Act, I still took 6 weeks off of work. My body still had to heal.
Yeah.
Because I had still given birth, as well as grief and needing to process the loss. And so, prior to then, prior to Genesis Act, I mean, miscarriages was just, you just had a miscarriage, because you didn't get the same, you weren't viewed the same like a mother who had given birth to a baby that everybody can see after the fact. So I just think that that's very important. And I was very happy because I'm a state employee myself. And I was just very happy to see that they are continuing to take steps in the right direction of just acknowledging all births, because regardless of the time frame, life began at that heartbeat.
Yeah.
And so a life was made, and that life matters.
Yep. Yes. I think you probably won't even know the full impact. But we're so glad that, like I said, this act exists. We're so glad for your just pushing through, in spite of, because I know it was difficult for you, just kind of dealing with your own things around it, but also still just pushing forward. So we appreciate that. And again, we appreciate you all for tuning in to another episode of Child Please Podcast. Please continue to spread the word, like the video, subscribe to the channel, all the things. And you can reach us on our website at www.thebluerosefoundation.org. Thank you all so much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers.